Welcome to our event today. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. Melissa is our host from the retreat center. So I'll invite her to give us some opening comments.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. We have registrants today from different parts of our country: Ontario, Canada, London, England, Bahrain, and Greece. So, welcome. I am Melissa from the Mary Joseph Retreat Center. We have been in establishment since 1963 and founded by Sister Mary Ignatius of the Daughters in Mary and Joseph. We have many workshops via Zoom as well as in person. Please check our website, maryjoseph.org, if you want to see beautiful pictures of our 8-acre campus here. All the registration fees are all towards our retreat center. So thank you so much for your support. And I will now give it to her. Thank you, her.
Wonderful. Thanks, Melissa. I live about a mile away from the retreat center and have for the last almost 50 years. It has been a real central part of my own personal development and my family's. That's a story for a different day. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And this is the next in the series of monthly talks that are an overview of some aspect of the steps. It's called Path to Freedom. And structurally, it's an effort to overview one step a month, starting with January, step 1, going to February, step 2, going to March, step 3. You kind of get the feel of a nice rhythm until you get to step 4, which is so large that I had to break it up. So last month, we talked about step 4, resentment inventory. And this month, we're going to talk about the balance of the step 4 inventory. Step 4, fear and sex and dishonesty, and the conclusion to the step 4 inventory. I'll be giving you a little bit of question and assignment to make it more real as we go through the work. Perhaps now at this point, we'll join in the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Step 4 made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And the key word there is moral. It doesn't mean a contrast to immoral. It means our values. What are our values? And we're going to do an inventory of that by looking at how our feet move. Yeah, if you really want to know who you are, pay attention to how you behave. Your behavior, how your feet move, tells you who you are. Your behavior, how your feet move, tells you what you believe. Your behavior, how your feet move, tells you what your principles are. Most of us have come to a 12-step program because we have suffered from addiction. Hardly anybody comes to a 12-step program in a good mood, or because they thought it was a good idea, or because they were attempting to elevate their spiritual life. Those are all of the kinds of things that develop over time, but most of us come pretty tattered, like this pathetic person, in bondage. Now, Bill uses the term in bondage of self, but that's a pretty sophisticated term, actually. That comes a little bit later on in terms of our understanding of the real problem. The presenting problem is the problem of addiction. And Bill acknowledges that. That's why he started the fellowship. That's why he wrote the book. It was about alcohol. And then it got broadened to every other kind of addiction. But addiction is the primary issue to begin with. But it really is the secondary issue with regard to the underlying problem. It's still in the first step, unmanageability, but it's not very well understood, unmanageability. And we looked at that in January. Unmanageability is those bedevilments listed on page 52 of the big book. Bedevilments, to be controlled as if by devils. Puppets on a string. I do what I don't want to do and I don't do what I want to do. That's really the definition of unmanageability. A behavioral description of my self-centeredness. Please join me in prayer for an open mind and an open heart. Most of you have had exposure to the steps. Most of you have had exposure to the 12-step fellowship. Most of you have done a little bit of work or a lot of work in step 4, or at least you've been in meetings that it's been discussed and you've heard about other people's experience. I was warned by my first step guide that I had a lot of information and a lot of experience, and to the extent that I held on to that information and experience, I was not going to have any new information or experience. My prejudice about knowing something, my prejudice about having experience was the very curtain that prevented me from seeing the light, from seeing the truth. I believed the lie and I couldn't see the truth. He introduced me to the set-aside prayer. For the very first time in 20 years, I've changed it. It looks the same there on the screen, but there's a word that's different. I used to have brokenness up till last week. I have changed it now going forward for my new workshops to unmanageability, since that's been my bullseye center point of my ministry, to try to get people to understand the best kept secret in the rooms of the 12-step fellowship. Addiction is a problem, clearly a problem, nasty, nasty problem. But once that's taken care of through finishing steps 1 through 9, we confront life and reality, and that's really the problem, unmanageability. So please join me in a confirmation and an affirmation, a desire to have an open mind and an open heart. Whether you pray a prayer out loud or pray it silently or don't pray it at all, at least at this point, for the next time that we're together, hour and a half, that you're willing to stay with us, be willing to have an open mind and an open heart, and to have it opened even beyond your willingness by a power other than yourself. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps and you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my unmanageability, the 12 steps, and especially you. So at the top of the screen, it says step 4 is about obstacles to power. In step 1, we had an experience. I'm hoping and praying that at some point you've had an experience with step 1, an experience of powerlessness, an experience of no choice, the ineffectiveness of your willpower to deal with your addiction, the ineffectiveness of your willpower once you've been given abstinence to deal with your life, to manage your life, to manage reality. Step 2 is a decision that there is a power, and step 3 is a decision that you can have a relationship with a caring power. There's no action in any of steps 1, 2, and 3. Step 3 suggests a prayer, which is a form of action, especially if you take it with another person, as suggested in step 3. But step 4 is really the evidence that you meant the commitment in step 3. Step 3 is a commitment to turn from my self-centeredness by identifying and analyzing that self-centeredness, by looking at our behavior. We looked at resentment. Today, I'm going to spend the balance of the time together looking at fears, looking at our sex inventory, looking at the balance of the inventory as I've discovered it. Some of it's revealed in the big book in step 4 and in step 5. Some of it's revealed in the 12 and 12 in steps 4 and 5. The words dishonesty are used regularly. The word secrets is not as clear in either of those books, but it's clearly implied. Today, we would be remiss, I feel, without using the words guilt and shame. Healthy guilt, healthy shame. Healthy guilt, a negative feeling about my behavior. Healthy shame, a negative feeling about the source of my behavior coming from me. And so I have in my way of life document, which is on my website, I have worksheets to do the resentment inventory because it's quite, from my experience, complicated. It's very simple in the big book, but there's no definitions and there's no instructions on application. The men who took me through the steps 4 different times over a 20-year period gave me specific definitions and specific application directions, which I have amalgamated into that set of instructions in my way of life document, which we went over last month. And if you weren't here, it's been recorded and edited and it's on YouTube, or it's on the Retreat Center website until we place it on YouTube, one or the other. As Melissa mentioned, all of the registration fees go to the Retreat Center. They support this work. They do all the administration, and it's a fundraiser for them so that they can survive the pandemic shutdown. All the money goes to them. So we looked at resentment. And we looked at making a list of the resentments and the reasons why we had them. We looked at column 3, which revealed our delusional beliefs. And we looked at column 4, which reveals our corrupt motives, our self-centeredness. I'm not going over that right now, but just giving a context of where we are to find freedom. We began to find freedom in the resentment inventory. In fact, Bill gives us a prayer that I reviewed with you for the removal of deep resentment. The implication is we're powerless over our deep resentment. Pages 66 and 67. I mean, that's a very generous description in a page and a half that he took to tell us you're as powerless over your resentments as you are over your addiction, having no power at all. So we pray. We don't pray for the person we resent. We pray for ourselves. We pray for the spiritual intervention. We pray for the divine surgeon to remove this cancer from ourselves. And we get free. Doing column 3 and doing column 4, we get free because we see the truth of the lie and we own it and we take responsibility for generating the resentment. 100%. I don't have a part in my resentment. I have 100% of it. It's my resentment. It's my negative energy. 100% generated by, driven by, and managed and held by me. 100%. The good news is, as Bill said on, I believe it's page 62, our troubles are of our own making. If that's true, then in fact, I can get free from it through this process. Well, it's the same with fear. I'm going to go over the big book in a minute, but Bill tells us to make a list of our fears. I suggest that you put down one or two of the major fears that just come to you spontaneously right now as you're listening, watching, participating in our discussion. One or two fears. You know, I've heard, I'm not a professional. I don't have any credentials or degrees or special designations in anything, actually. But I've got some information and I read extensively about people who do have those degrees and credentials. And they speculate that there's only two normal fears. There's only two natural fears. Only two. One is the fear of loud noises and the other is the fear of falling. The fear of loud noise and the fear of falling. Everything else is an acquired fear. Well, the good news is if it's an acquired fear, it can be professionally, they use the term extinguished, meaning it can be reduced, minimized, and even eliminated. And that's the experience that I have certainly in the big book. We make a list of the fears. We ask why we have it. It's pretty straightforward in the big book. Not complicated like it is in the resentment inventory. On page 67, he makes a comment and refers to the resentment inventory, column 3. He says the fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer. You could look at page 65 for that if you have your big book, or just make a note to do that just to see what Bill is talking about. And he talks about fear as the thread, the fabric of our existence, which shows you, if you take a look at the shirt that you wear or the carpet that your chair is on, you can see the weaving of the various colors of thread. That's what he's speculating is fear in our lives. It's that interwoven into our lives and into our makeups. He says fear, set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Very much like the resentment inventory. We initiate, not realizing that we initiate people's reaction. Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. Not ever sure what that means, except when Bill was writing, they were coming out of the Depression and goods were very dear, meaning very scarce and very pricey, and money was very scarce. So perhaps that's the sensitivity at that point, given the culture of the Depression. But then on page 68, he gives us the specific instructions, really simple. We reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper. Even though we had no resentment in connection with them, we asked ourselves why we had them. Column 1, column 2, that's it. The first time I did that, 1988, when the first time I did the steps out of the big book with the guidance of a mechanic, a man who knew what he was doing, a mechanic with the textbook, a real teacher. He had a knowledge of the book, but he also had experience with the book for the very first time. I was 4 years sober. And he asked me to do that, make a list of the fears and why I had it. But that was it. The second time I went through the steps, the man added to it. It's not in the big book and it's not in the 12 and 12, but it was his creative and expanded experience. He said, keep asking the question. You ask the question and you get an answer, then ask the question of that answer. What fear comes up as a result of that answer? And continue peeling it, getting down underneath it, until you come to the floor, the foundation of the fear. You'll either come to an answer, or you'll hit a wall where you can't go any further, or you'll begin to be spiral, and then just stop and go on to the next fear. So, a simple example, it's fictitious. It's not part of my repertoire of experience, but it's a fictitious to give an example of what I mean. Let's assume I had a fear of dogs, large dogs, and I put that down. And I said, why do I have it? Well, because I would remember in this story, fictitious, that I was attacked by a large dog when I was 6 years old, and I was hospitalized with stitches. Well, then I really understand why I have the fear. All right, and I can work with that. But here's a real one. This did come from my experience. I put down, I have a fear of honesty with others. I'm 4 years sober. My sponsor has attempted to train me to be transparent, to be accountable. So I was aware of and sensitive to the need for rigorous honesty. I wasn't rigorously honest, but I was aware that it was a operating principle, one of the more essential ones. Page 58, how it works, spends an entire page talking about rigorous honesty. But I wasn't rigorously honest. So I put down, I have a fear of being honest. Then I asked, well, why do I have that? Well, if I'm honest with you, then I can no longer pretend to be who I want you to think I am. Well, why is that important? You see the benefit of the second question and the third question and the fourth question. What will happen? What's the fear if that happens? Well, if I tell you the truth, you will see that I'm not as good as I think I am. I'm not as good as I want you to think I am. Well, what will happen if then you might disassociate with me, or in my workplace, you might not promote me, or you might fire me, or you might not like me. A lot of different answers. This is not a formula for the correct answer. This is a formula to generate answers. This is a mechanism to stimulate answers. We're using that set-aside attitude, that set-aside prayer. Well, what will happen if you are independent and you think of me the way you think of me? Then I won't be able to get what I want, or I'll lose what I have. And on and on and on until I saw that I really have very low self-esteem. And that's why I've created this persona, this Hollywood stage front of grandiosity and superiority and education and intelligence, because that's who I want you to think I am, even though consciously and somewhat unconsciously, I don't think I'm that at all. It was a total cover. My grandiosity, in fact, was a cover for my very low self-esteem. That was shocking information for me. And I'd had years of therapy and never revealed that to me. In the sense of an existential experience, a literal, in the head, I had lots of formulas for human behavior, but none of it meant anything to me. They're irrelevant to me in terms of my feelings, in terms of my experience, in terms of changing anything. But here I am now, embarrassed in my own presence. I've believed the lie, and I want you to believe a lie so that we'll both believe the lie and I won't see the truth. Now, that's not that conscious, of course, until I make it conscious in this process. And then you take the next fear and you unpack it, and you take the next fear. And perhaps a pattern will surface, as it did with me, that pattern that confirmed that my life was a cover story for all the weaknesses that I had, that I felt would prevent me from getting what I want. So back to the big book. Wasn't it because page 68, wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but it didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. And Bill really understood the dynamic of what I just described. Quite frankly, it was part of his dynamic at 12 years old, a very tall, ungainly, awkward, abandoned by his parents at 12 years old. Both his parents left. His father went to Canada. His mother went to Boston to become an osteopath. And she left Bill with her father, and that grandfather raised him. Perhaps there is a better way. We think so. For we are now on a different basis. Well, we have to ask, if we're interacting with the big book, what's the different basis? Bill tells us. The basis of trusting and relying upon God. When did that happen? Oh, that was our commitment in step 3, right? Made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God. That was the commitment. And the first action in toward that commitment is step 4. The balance of the actions are steps 5 through 9. That's the turning from self-centeredness to other-centeredness that is guaranteed by the big book. Step 12. Listen to the step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening. Well, sounds very poetic and mystical until you understand what it means. Look at Appendix 2. A spiritual awakening. A change in the way we think and feel and behave, and it's done to us, not by us, and not without us. You've heard my definitions before. I won't spend any time unpacking it. The basis of trusting and relying upon God. Then he goes on here. This is now becoming a little dense in the big book. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. Wonderful contrast. Infinite God, is that what you believe? In contrast to our finite self. Is that your experience? Step 1 was clearly the experience of finite. I am ineffective at the deepest root level, and yet I'm still responsible. And my step 2 and step 3 experience is that there is something infinite. Having no beginning, having no end, a mystery that I cannot solve, and therefore we name it the way we want to name it, not according to the big book, or not according to the Bible, or not according to the Quran, or not according to any other than our own decision, the silver bullet of the 12-step fellowship. We form our own concept based on what we make a decision to believe. Then he has this wonderful phrase here. We are in the world to play the role God assigns. And this man said, turn it inside out, Herb. Turn that statement into a question. It's a critical question. What role are we in the world to play? Put a big question mark in the margin on page 68. And don't answer it. Continue to ask it as you do the balance of the steps through 9, but don't answer it. What is your role, Herb? And the answer is so important. as he suggests in the next line. Just to the extent that we do as we think God would have us and humbly rely on God, does God enable us to match calamity with serenity. You want peace? Find out what your destiny is and do it. That's the translation. It's a dense sentence. Just to the extent that we do behaviorally, as we think God would have us, it's up to us to come to grips with that vision and humbly rely on God. That's a choice. Does God enable us to match calamity with serenity? You want harmony? Be in alignment with your reality. Alignment is the key word if you were around when I did step 3. It's not in the big book. It's not in the 12 and 12, that word. But for me, it's the best word that talks about the purpose of step 3, alignment. I make a decision to be in alignment with reality. Steps 4 through 9 identify how I'm out of alignment with reality. And step 10 reminds me to stay in alignment. And when I'm out of alignment, I will be disturbed. And I have a formula for becoming more in alignment with the flow. We never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. We're talking about faith here. The verdict of all ages is that faith means courage. We saw that in step 2, if you were with me, page 53. God is or God isn't. There's no knowledge there. There's no certitude there. There's no feeling there. There's no emotion there. There's nothing concrete about faith. It's very smoky. It's very invisible. It's very tenuous, very dark and very thin. We make a decision, page 53. God is or God isn't. What is your choice? What is your decision? It takes a lot of courage, he says. The people of faith have courage. They trust their God. Now, trust is the translation of that faith decision into action, which is that commitment of step 3. That commitment to turn. I make a decision to turn. From what to what? From my self-centeredness, which I saw in my unmanageability, pages 60 to 62, unmanageability, those bedevilments, the behavioral description of unmanageability. I turn from my self-centeredness to other-centeredness. Other with a capital O, God as we don't understand it. Others with a small o, the balance of humanity in an attitude of principles and helpfulness. We turn from our self-centeredness to other-centeredness, and our life flourishes. That's not in the big book. It's absolutely my summary experience. If you want to expand on the psychological basis of what I just said, read Flourish. That's the name of a book, Flourish, by the father of positive psychology, Seligman, Seligman. Instead, we let God demonstrate through us what God can do. We ask God to remove our fear and direct our attention to what God will have us be at once we commence to outgrow fear. Well, this is pretty dense stuff. Let's pay attention to it. God will demonstrate through us what God can do. That's that spiritual awakening, a change in the way we think and feel and behave, and it's done to us, not by us, but not without us. We ask God to remove our fear. Now, Bill doesn't spend much time here, 2 lines, in contrast to 2 pages in resentment inventory, but he's saying the same thing. We're as powerless to remove our fear as we are to solve our addiction problem. I'm applying step 1 principle here of powerless, no choice. Oh, we can name it as I did. We can analyze it as I did. We can write about it and we can talk about it as I did. But we can't, in the final analysis, get rid of it. This deep-rooted cellular trauma in our current vocabulary, that devastating fear that misshapes our personalities and our lives. It's a simple prayer. God, please remove this fear. Be specific as you are with the resentment inventory. You're not working on your fear. You're working on your faith. And they're a reciprocal relationship. Look at my arms. People talk about if you have fear, you don't have faith, and if you have faith, you don't have fear. And I understand what they're trying to communicate. Admirable. It's just not accurate. If I have faith, I'll have less fear. If I have fear, I have less faith. It's a reciprocal relationship. They both reside in me, and they can reside both in me. And to the extent that I look at the light, it will grow. To the extent that I look at the darkness, it will grow. It's just basic psychology, isn't it? What we focus on grows. What we resist grows. This is not about resistance. It is a little bit about effort, but mostly the effort to foster our faith, to foster our consciousness, to foster our relationship with power. I have a worksheet in my Way of Life document that helps with the turnaround that people experience in the resentment inventory. Column 3, column 4 are geared to having what Katie Byron calls a turnaround. I love that term. I experienced it in doing column 3, column 4 before I ever had the term, and then I read Byron Katie's book. Byron Katie, yeah, I think so. It's called Loving What Is. Loving What Is. Once you've done a resentment inventory, column 3, column 4, and you read her book, which has got nothing to do with a 12-step or psychology, quite frankly, she has come to her own experience and her own way of approaching it. It's totally applicable. And you can see the benefit of her approach to asking questions, to become conscious, and to become aware of reality. The turning from column 3 to column 4 is the turning from the lie to the truth, from embracing the delusion and false beliefs about our life to seeing the corrupt motives and the reality and making a decision to live in reality rather than in our delusions. Well, the same is with the fear inventory. In the Way of Life document, I have this worksheet that names the fear and why I have it, but it also then asks, well, what behavior is manifest when I have that fear? And then to get the turnaround, what would the opposite of the fear be? What would the virtue be? Virtue comes from the Latin virtus, which means strength. What would be the strength if I didn't have this fear? And then what would be the behavior that comes from that? So if I, in the use of the big book's terms, if I had to trust, which would be the opposite of a particular fear, for instance, trust in a power other than myself, or trust in myself, or trust in the direction of my sponsor, or trust in the direction of my psychologist, or trust in the direction of my accountability partner, what behavior? Then I would take the behavior no matter how I felt about it. That was one of the early things I learned in the 12-step programs. Without ever doing the steps, people would say things like deep wisdom, things like, when you have fear, turn around and face it. I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. Because I didn't know that they had an experience of finding freedom this way. But it's just really good human behavior to take contrary actions. Because fear, and you've heard the acronyms, we have wonderful and cute and funny acronyms. Fear, false evidence appearing real. You turn around and you face the fear. And then it said you walk toward it and you look it straight in the eye. Normally, when you do that, figuratively or literally, the fear withers and the courage builds. And you take actions contrary to the fear. And you get a certain amount of confidence that the fear is not real and that you actually do have the power and the confidence and the energy and the intelligence and the support from your community to take the contrary actions. Dan Siegel is a psychiatrist at the University of California, UCLA. And for 20 years, he's been doing work on the brain. And he has now validated that we change our brain physiologically, we change our brain biologically by acts contrary, not by knowledge, not by emotion, by action. You've heard it from sponsors, I'm sure, certainly from wisdom literature of the spiritual nature for traditions over thousands of years. It doesn't matter what you know, and it doesn't matter how you feel. It does matter what you do. And when you do differently, you begin to know differently. You begin to feel differently. And now it's been validated in biological and psychological science. We change the brain synapses. I'm not a technician. As I said, I don't have those kinds of degrees, but I know the vocabulary from reading the people who do. Synapses are the nerve endings at the end of the nerves that mate or combine when they're fired together. In fact, he created a phrase, synapses that fire together, wire together, and we create new neuronal paths in our brain. We're recreating our brain, we're healing our brain, we're creating new habits in biology and physiology by changing the behavior, the way we move our feet. It's amazing science to support what we've known for 100 years in the 12-step programs. Sponsors have said that, acts contrary to our behavior. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter how you feel. It does matter what you do. Oops. Okay, I'm having a little trouble with my technology here. Okay, let's see. And so, as Bill says in the big book, it's a lack of trust. Well, certainly in trust in ourselves. And a lot of that's warranted because we know how untrustworthy we are. But I had a sponsor that I trusted. I had a step guide that I trusted. Eventually, I had a power other than myself that I trusted, but that didn't take place for a while. I thought I believed, but I didn't have the actual experience of belief until I was 10 years sober. So it's a process like that dimmer switch. It's a process of learning. It's a process of experimenting. It's a process of taking actions and then pausing and looking back over your shoulder to see the truth of the change. The whole definition of spiritual awakening can be put into one word: change. a change in the way we think, a change in the way we feel, but mostly a change in the way we behave. And the behavior might begin to change before anything else. I'm going to take a pause here and ask if there are any questions concerning the fear inventory before we go forward.
Thank you so much. I've done your year-long workshop. I'm doing your step guide thing. I love your work. And even though I've done this, I'm still not there.
Who's there?
In alignment in the way I'd like to be.
Ah, well, yes.
And I just want to say that I'll give an example. It's a fear I know. I'm afraid things won't work out. I'm afraid I won't
work out me.
My way.
Well, you're guaranteed to be disappointed.
Right. And I'm afraid my needs won't get met. That's what it really is. My needs won't get met. And that's there's old reasons for it.
Yeah.
And my life is very good. But I haven't, in an interaction with somebody,
yeah,
it's like the names may change, but the thing keeps happening.
That's what they call a pattern. That's right.
And
so have you looked at why do you have that fear? My needs won't get met. All right. So let's just pursue it for a minute. What if your needs as you define them are not met? What happens then? What's your fear?
Well, that I won't be taken care of.
Let's assume that you're completely orphaned and abandoned and you're not going to be taken care of by any power or sense that you're aware of right now. What fear comes up?
Well, I know it's a very old fear because my mother didn't pick me up on the corner and I waited there forever until she came and got me. I'm very,
a decade or two ago.
Yeah, give or take. Now that I'm 68, right. And I'm very aware. I really am aware. And I know the answer is relying on a power greater than myself.
Wait. What's your fear when you say that?
Well, actually, when I do rely on the power greater than myself that I don't understand, but I know there is one because I've had a spiritual awakening, I've had spiritual experiences, then my picture doesn't matter. I mean, it takes me more work still to actually make that conscious decision when I'm in an interaction with somebody.
Yeah. Well, but that's it, isn't it? And that's step 10, isn't it? That is step 10. When I'm disturbed, it says in the 12 and 12, it's a spiritual axiom. When I'm disturbed, there's something wrong with me. And Bill says in the big book in step 10, we pray because we're powerless. We talk to somebody because we're human. We make an amend if we've troubled other people. And the final component, we turn our thoughts to helping somebody else.
Yeah.
In the final analysis, after all the work that you can possibly do is done, you begin to think about somebody else, and guess what? You're not thinking about yourself.
Yeah.
And you get free.
Yeah.
Yep.
I like being reminded of that on a regular basis.
Well, and Bill reads chapter 10 from the 12 and 12. He calls it a spot check inventory. Mm-hmm. On the spot, when I'm disturbed, I embrace step 10 so that I get back into alignment. Mm-hmm. Because when I'm self-centered, I'm out of alignment. And when I'm in a proper relationship with power, I'm in alignment and my life is going to flow and flourish.
Right.
Yep. Look at her smile.
I know it's true. But when I'm
Your smile was a connection to your experience because you do know that it's true.
But when I'm faced with this person
Then what?
who wants to be paid more than I think she should be paid,
Yeah.
and she gets aggressive, and I say, we have to talk later about this. I just need to talk later about this.
Great. Yeah.
And then I ruminate, but then I know the answer is, okay, tell what my fear is, that she'll get what she wants and I won't get what I want. That if I'm generous, I'm supposed to be generous. I feel better when I'm generous.
Well, be careful of the supposed to.
Right.
A lot of us live by shoulds that are fairy tales.
Right. It's like finding the balance. If I focus on
the balance is the key. That's right. Finding the balance between protecting yourself and living a life of principle. That's right. There's the balance right there. When I talk to the people I work with, I say, find the principle and always take the high road. I'm a big believer in generosity. That's the high road, right? But it's not about bribery. So there's a balance there, and there's no formula for it. It's not a science; it's an art form, and but see, you already know all of this because you have an experience, and so you're building your own character by confronting the fears that you have, right? Yeah.
Thanks.
I guess what I want to ask is piggybacking on what the last person just said, like the fear comes back, then it goes away. Then the fear comes back, then it goes away. And sometimes that's a lot within like 3 or 4 times a day. My script in my head that comes from my deep, whatever, I can psychoanalyze it forever and ever.
Yes.
And I hear you say things like when I'm in alignment, that I'm at peace. And that's the thing. Like I have a fear. I talk to my trusted fellows. They say, hey, that's fear. I'm like, oh, that's fear. I talk to my little girl inside. I'm like, hey, little girl, I love you. You're okay. We got you. It's going to be okay. I confronted the fear. I walked directly into it and did the action that I felt compulsively to do. And I did it. And I was like, wait, what the hell was that? Like that, like I felt like it was that story like where somebody has to go. It's in the Bible where you got to take the kid to the mountain to kill the son or whatever. And then at the end, it's like, no, just kidding. You don't have to do that. Like, what? That made sense to me, not, but if the fear comes back, you just ask for it to be lifted. And if it doesn't, yes, I have an anxiety disorder, whatever. I'm not trying to get all like psycho on it, but I hesitate because it comes and it's been, the names have changed, but the pattern's been my whole life, ever since I was a little kid. Yeah. So anyway, that to say,
that might need professional help, so don't overlook that. And
I have professional help.
Well, when I say professional, though, I want to expand that. It's therapy, perhaps with a counselor, a therapist, a psychiatrist, but it's also potential medication. There are people who have a neurological impairment, either from trauma or from some other damage, that needs intervention. Oh, so I'm not overlooking that, but that's not my perspective. That's not my ken. That's not my background. So I'm talking about this to deal with that. And if there are areas that are not successfully handled by what we're doing here, then seek out additional help. Absolutely.
I definitely do. I have a psychiatrist. I have a therapist. I work all the stuff. I do all the things. I show up for other people. I practice. Good, actually.
All right.
I did 30 minutes a day for like 300 days in a row, and then I missed a day. Damn it. And then I went into rebellion.
Welcome. Oh,
I'm not doing this anymore. I didn't do it perfectly.
And are you back on the horse now?
15 minutes. I'm still rebelling.
No, I'm saying I don't care about the amount of time. Do you do a daily meditation?
I have to.
Well, okay.
I have to.
The answer is no, not right now, but I will get back on the bicycle.
No, I did it today.
All right, good.
Just for today, right?
All you can do is for today. But I find that the source of my power and my living this life in alignment comes from my two things, primarily from my meditation practice, and then secondly from my accountability practice.
Well, and then you're teaching. So you're teaching what you're trying to learn, right? So
correct. Yeah, absolutely. You guys are as good for me as I am for you. There's no question about that. Absolutely.
yeah, I totally want to be you when I grow up. So
So,
I mean, not you, Herb K, but you helping a larger crew. Like that's my jam.
My prayer is everybody catch fire and then become a prairie fire so that everybody catches fire. Isn't that the best sort of multi-level marketing?
Well, inspiration's where it's at. Anyway, thank you for your time.
Thanks very much.
I just had a question on, the question, why do I have it?
Yeah.
And not only, sometimes I struggle this with myself, but I also struggle as a sponsor working with sponsees, getting at the why do we have this fear? Yeah. And I was wondering if there's any techniques to get to.
I want to say something here. It's not asking the question here, why? And so that might lead you in the wrong direction, because it's not a head trip. It's a feeling trip. So it's what fear comes up, not why does it come up, but what fear comes up. All right. So stay with the fears rather than trying to logically explain it. Try to unpack the fears underneath the fears underneath the fears. Some people are afraid of death. Some people are afraid of relapse. Some people are afraid of suffering. And normally when we stay with the feelings, we can get down to some pattern underneath it all that is the core pattern for our fears. But I didn't say that earlier, and thank you for prompting it. But go ahead, please.
That was it. That was my question.
Oh, okay. So
I was just techniques at getting to the core, I guess. Like,
I don't think this. I don't dismiss the head at all. Of course, it's very important to think on the logic, but in the fear inventory, try to stay in the feelings. What feeling comes up as fear when the outcome that I feared would happen? What is the next fear? Well, if I lose my job, I'll lose my house. I'll be hungry. I'll be on the street. I'll drink again. I'll suffer for a long time. I'll lose all my friends, and then I'll die. Okay. What fear comes up if, in fact, you die? Well, some people are challenged by their whole concept of God or their whole concept of purpose. I'm not saying that's mine. I'm just saying what other people have experienced. So be creative and push it. Keep pushing it, but not in the head thing in terms of the logical development, in the heart thing in terms of the emotional development, the emotional unpacking and peeling back of feeling, because fear is definitely a feeling.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much.
I want to talk about my fear, if I may. I go to meetings, certain meetings. In this room, I feel welcomed and I am not in fear. There are other meetings I go to and I feel as if everyone is much smarter than I am, much more ahead in their development, spiritual development. And I feel very small and insignificant. And I feel stupid. I can never share as eloquently as these people seem to. You get the drift. And so I get paralyzed with this fear. It's a terror. And I literally am terrorized and paralyzed. I feel so small. And the one thing you said that was, is to go think about being of service to another. So the way out, but before I get there, I have a lot of work to do, is to think, well, if I share at this meeting, maybe someone needs to hear what I have to say, and think of it as a service rather than a competition, some kind of,
Right.
Yeah. But then before I get to that, I have to get through the fear because I am paralyzed in that moment. And so I've been asking myself the questions, what happens if they do laugh at me? What happens if I am shamed? What happens if they don't want me back at the meeting? What happens if I can't go back to the meeting? I like these people. I admire those people. I'll be all by myself. I'll be abandoned. I'll be helpless, isolated. And I can't think of, as I go down the list, the final thing, of course, is death. And then you asked just a second ago, what's the big deal? So, but my little girl can't understand what's the big deal. That terrorized part of me truly believes this is a life, and I can't believe I'm saying this. This is a eureka moment. It's a life and death moment when I'm at that particular meeting. That's an insanity. I can see that clearly now because it is so not a life and death moment. Your thoughts, Herb?
Yeah, false evidence appearing real. And right in the middle of the way you were unpacking it, which is, I believe, a very healthy way of doing it, the way you did it, it was the of looking stupid, feeling small. And then I think someplace in there, you examined your motives for perhaps sharing that might be helpful. And as I heard it, you connected in a way that said, oh, I might appear stupid and I might appear small, but I might be useful. And I think that's the turnaround there, that we get real clear on our motives. If you want to look smart, then you're going to be filled with fear of not looking smart.
Yes, I want to look smart because in my heart, I believe I'm not smart. Just as you were talking about earlier about yourself, I must appear smart. I'm proving not to you, to me. And so I'm looking for your validation to tell me, hey, that's pretty smart. So I have to own the fact that I'm not as smart as I would like to be, sadly.
I may not be. I may not be. I may not be as smart as I would like to be perceived to be.
Yeah, perceived, right.
Even be as smart as I think I am, actually. My daughters are very clear about some things when they give me feedback, you know what I mean? And so it's kind of like, okay, but my motive, I'm trying to make my motive as clean as possible. I just really want to be helpful. And if it sounds silly, gosh, okay, but my motive was really clean.
So it's even, you said, think of help in the 10th step, the turnaround, look to be of service to another. It's even really deeper than that. It's my motive is always to help another. It's never about self-aggrandizement, and I'm still locked into that. So I will pray and ask God for help and assistance for this sinner.
Nobody likes to be embarrassed. Nobody likes to be embarrassed. And yet I'm willing to be embarrassed if, in fact, I can help somebody with my awkwardness. So let's move on now. On page 68, Bill says now about sex. Well, the sex inventory as I've experienced it is not about sex. There's no question in there about gender or frequency or position. It's really about our motives and about our impact of our behavior on others. But let's take a look at how the big book sets us up. Many of us needed an overhauling there. I'm on page 68. Above all, we tried to be sensible. There's two major themes here in this 2 pages in the sex inventory. One is common sense, and the other is God is the only criteria. That's language from the big book. It's language from that culture. It's language from that time. But it's really saying it's between you and yourself in your conscience. But is suggesting a developed conscience here. My conscience, even though I was quite educated, was not developed. It got developed because I got abstinent from alcohol, therefore I thawed out from that standpoint. And then at 4 years of sobriety, did this step work with a man who really understood the big book. And so he took me through these pages in the way I'm about to take you through it. He said, we find human opinions running to extremes. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature. Then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, page 69. So he's talking about these two extremes. The extremes are the Victorian that Bill had just come out of, Queen Victoria, and the puritanical reign or culture, and the libertine culture that Bill was experiencing, the jazz era, prohibition, the speakeasies, and all of that. He said, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. Bill was clearly aware of Freudian theory, the underbelly of which is sex is the major core issue of human problems. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, Victorian, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet, libertine. Here's on page 69, the big book and the 12-step fellowship's doctrine, their opinion, their position on sex. We want to stay out of this controversy. I mean, it couldn't be clearer. And now he's going to make it clearer. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. If you're a sponsor, please. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We have no opinion. I have no opinion for you. I have an opinion for me. That's my responsibility. What can we do about them? Well, we've reviewed our conduct over the years past. That's a similar introduction that Bill gave us in the resentment inventory and gave us in the fear inventory. Make a list. If you haven't done a sex inventory, go back to your earliest memories of your sexual awareness. Might be age 4 or 5. It might be self-exploration. It might be playing doctors. It could be all kinds of mischief going on as you're learning and as you're growing and as you're evolving. And then as you get to late grammar school or high school and look at those years, if you haven't done an inventory, and make a list of the occasions and the people and the events and the activities. Once we have that list, and if you've already done a sex inventory and it's different than the instructions here in the big book, you might want to go back and take a look at the work that you've done before, or if it's the same as the big book, then go back to the last time you did an inventory. Maybe 10 years ago, you did an inventory and you brought your sex inventory current as of 10 years ago. Well, if you're doing it now as we're sitting here talking, then take a look at the last 10 years. And these are the 9 questions that Bill, I make 9 questions out of these because I take the words from some of the multiple questions in a sentence and make them separate sentences. If you have my way of life document, you'll see that. It's a worksheet, but all it does is it elaborates these 9 questions. Where had I been selfish? That's a single question. And what do we mean by selfish? Thinking about myself, I make that definition up. Dishonest, misrepresenting myself, inconsiderate, not considering other people. Those are 3 questions. Then the 4th question, whom did I hurt? 5th question, did I unjustifiably arouse jealousy? That's a single question. Suspicion, number 5, or 6 rather. Bitterness, number 7. Number 8, where was I at fault? Very much like the resentment inventory, 4th column. Taking responsibility for my actions, my thoughts, my motives, my behavior. And then I think the entire purpose and the primary question to be really addressed is this question number 9. What should I have done instead? But not with the guilt and the shame perspective of going back to age 20 from the perspective of age 50 and judging my age 20 behavior. No, that doesn't help at all. This is not about guilt. This is not about shame. This is not about judgment. We're evaluating. If now at age 50, I were to encounter the situation that I encountered at age 20, what would be the operating principles I would want to incorporate today? That's such a healthy way of approaching it. What should I have done instead? You see, the whole point of this, as Bill says in a minute, is to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life, not to beat ourselves up for yesterday's behavior, but to establish in a solid way what the principles are to guide me today in my current and future behavior. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? At the core of it, I mean, he elaborated the spiritual malady, the unmanageability, pages 60 to 62. He just put a laser focus on page 62. Selfishness, self-centeredness, this is the root of the trouble. Again, like in fear and like in resentment, he said, you're powerless to even know what to do, let alone to what to do it. He makes those distinctions all the time, that we are powerless to know what to do. And even if we know what to do, we're powerless to do the right thing. And that's why step 11 is crafted so wonderfully. Think about how it ends. Praying for the knowledge of God's will and the power to carry it out. Because the very nature of unmanageability is I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do. And my personal experience was 4 years sober. I didn't know that I didn't know. That was the most embarrassing thing in the world. 48 years old with a graduate education in philosophy, psychology, and theology. 3 different branches of science. 4 years sober. I did not know that I did not know. I did not know that I had principles. I did not know that I should have principles. I had some, but I didn't have a full quiver of principles that would have guided my behavior, nor did I actually want them up until that point, by the way. We ask God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them, to give us the knowledge and to give us the power. The big book Integrity internally is wonderful. What it says in one place, it says in another place. We're as powerless to know better, and even knowing better, we're powerless to do better. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, remember, he said, we do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct, celibate, heterosexual, homosexual, monogamous, polygamous. We have no opinion. No, we have no opinion in the fellowship. As a person, Herb, I have an opinion for myself, but I don't get that I don't get to place that on anybody else. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm. Of course, each of the components of step 4 connects to step 8, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. We treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God. So he's suggesting both prayer and meditation. We ask God is a suggestion for prayer. Meditation is a suggestion for reflection after prayer. what should we do about each matter? We think about that in the milieu of this set-aside attitude and establishing the principles. Oh, let's see. One of the principles would be, how about rigorous honesty? How about consideration? How about kindness? How about concern for their benefit? The right answer will come if we want it. Bill goes on now with this second theme. Remember I said at the beginning, there are two themes. Common sense was one. And the second theme is God is the only source, the litmus test. God alone can judge our sex situation. But then he gets very real. Counsel with persons is often desirable. If you need help, sponsors and step guides, perhaps significant others, perhaps parents, perhaps religious, ordained or trained people, perhaps therapists and psychiatrists and sex therapists. But then he says, in the final analysis, we let God be the final judge. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. So let's assume that I established my principles in 1988, as I did, that fidelity was going to be the core of my going forward principle, since it was a principle I really knew that I should be following and hadn't really followed that. He says, suppose we fall short. Does it mean we're going to get drunk? Maybe, he said, but it depends on our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, I'm as powerless over my commitment to fidelity as I am over my commitment to not drink. We believe we will be forgiven and will learn our lesson. Here's the warning sign that this man gave me. If we're not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience. Rarely does Bill pull out the ultimate hammer, the guillotine, that in fact you're going to relapse. He does it several times in very prominent places. And this man said to me, Herb, you either have to get divorced or you have to change your behavior. Otherwise, you're going to drink again. To sum up, we earnestly pray for the right ideal. We pray for it because, in fact, we're powerless to develop it on our own. For sanity, what he means is healthy thinking. He doesn't mean psychiatric or psychological. Take a look at his own definition on page 37 at the end of Jim's story, who put a little whiskey in his milk. Bill calls that insanity, and he uses the word properly. It comes from the Latin word sanus, which means health. When you put an I-N in front of it, it means not healthy. Bill uses the term insanity in the big book as not healthy thinking, not in terms of psychiatric, not in terms of psychological, just unhealthy thinking, disproportionate thinking, delusional thinking. We pray for sanity and the strength to do the right thing. Now, here's again, like I made a great emphasis on in step 10, thanks to our discussion. He says, if sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves, and it quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. I'm going to take some questions here in a minute, but I do want to finish reviewing the next couple paragraphs, because the big book gives us a quick summary of the going forward in preparation for the fifth step. He said, we've written down a lot. We've listed and analyzed our resentments. Notice he uses the term analyzed our resentments so that we really understand them. That's why column 3 and column 4 is such a analytical approach, quite frankly. My experience is using those two worksheets penetrates the unconscious in a way that I've never been able to before, so that I can really see my beliefs distorted beliefs about reality, my script, my story. I can really see my corrupt motives. We begin to comprehend their futility and fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all people, even our enemies, for we look on them as sick people. If you attended my workshop on resentment, I spend quite a bit of time on pages 66 and 67, that prayer practice for the removal of deep resentment from me. It's not a prayer for other people. Misinterpreted many times that way. It's not. It's a prayer for me, inviting the spirit, the healing spirit, the surgical spirit to remove the cancer from me. That is a prayer for me there to heal my deep resentment. Faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves, page 71. We hope you are convinced that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked us off from him. So this is the whole point of it. I am powerless and yet responsible. I have the ability to name it, to analyze it, to talk about it. Some of that will diminish it. Some of that will eliminate it. My resentment, my fear, straighten out my sexual behavior, straighten out my dishonesty. Some of it, that process, in step 4. But then, of course, he says we have to go further. If you have already made a decision, step 3, and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, for you perfectionists out there, please pay attention. Grosser handicaps, we're looking for white tuna and shark and white tuna. No, white shark and tuna. All right. We're looking for the big stuff, not the mosquitoes. The net gets thinner as we get more evolved and more mature. You have made a good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. Swallowed and digested, meaning accepted. In the Way of Life document, I have a summary for completing step 4 that isn't in the big book or in the 12 and 12, but just based on my experience, because I had a whole raft of dishonesty, of stealing and cheating that wasn't surfaced in the resentment, fear, and sex inventory. And I wanted to expose all of that so that there were no shadows, no secrets. And that was the big emphasis from the man who took me through the steps. No secrets, complete transparency. Any area that was a potential source of tension. That's the whole point of this inventory. It's not about confession. It's not about sin. It's not about judging. It's not about guilt and shame. It's not about negativity. It's about identifying and removing the sources of tension in us, because if we have the tension in us, we have, as addicts, the fallback position to soothe the tension, and we know how to do that real well. So it's about eliminating these tensions and the sources of the tension. Now, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 will heal some of the sources of that tension, but right now we're dealing with their manifestations. And so in that document, I talk about guilt and shame, embarrassment, dishonesty, secrets, irresponsibility, financial, relationship, behavior, family, work, irresponsibilities. The 12 and 12 talks about the 7 capital sins. I don't use that model, but Bill did, and he recommended it in chapter 4 of the 12 and 12. He was under the mentorship teacher. He was his spiritual director at that time was a Jesuit priest, Father Ed Dowling, from 1940 to 1960. And the 7 capital sins clearly comes out of the Catholic protocol: pride, greed, lust, gluttony, envy, anger, sloth. Some people find it very helpful to go down those lists and just check through their own behavior to kind of call out the kinds of, and call out. any area of conscious awareness of discomfort, embarrassment, or resistance to disclosure, even if you've disclosed secrets before, if you're still uncomfortable with the secret, if there's still tension around that secret, I really recommend that you note it and discuss it at the end of your fourth step. My final general principle, err on the side of maximizing rather than minimizing. This is about rigorous honesty, about being transparent. I asked my sponsor, what does transparent mean? He said, I want your insides and your outsides to match. I didn't know what he meant then. I certainly know what he means now. This is about removing the sludge in us that blocks us from God. I have the image of the sunlight in us, and that all of this sludge, these obstacles, these impediments are the clouds in us. And that the step 4 is the primary tool, like a roto-rooter, to clean out the channel. The St. Francis prayer talks about the channel, that we are a channel of life, a channel of God, a channel of grace. And to the extent that there is darkness in us, the light is diminished. To the extent that the darkness is removed, we're a channel of light, not only for the light to be in us, shining to us, but shining to us and then through us, being lanterns to the people around us, which is my favorite image, of course, of helping other people. Whether that's a sponsor or a step guide or just being useful in the community, to be a lantern, to shine the light on the path that I've walked, so that you can walk that path in the light of my experience to have your own experience. Let me just see what we got here in the PowerPoint. And I think probably, yeah, I've just got that. Oh, and in the final, make a list of the areas that are hiding resistance or discomfort, guilt and shame, and secrets. Those are the 7 capital sins that I mentioned. If you are in the bondage of tension of any kind, what you really want is freedom. And you notice that this pathetic character is still locked in the prison, but it's of his own making. This is our real transformation, when we realize that we're holding the bars in front of our face. There's no ceiling, there's no walls, there's no floor. We just have to drop the bars. All right, so we have some time now for some questions. If you have some, or comments, or shared experience. Anybody have questions, concerns about the sex inventory, or about the final sort of wrap on the preparation of the 4th step? Make sure that you're organized and that you make a call to the person who you think you're going to invite to hear your 5th step with enough time, so that you're not finishing your 4th step and then waiting around to do your 5th step, because it does take time to set up. Organizing people's schedule, normally it's a longer session than just a conversation with a sponsee, typically more than an hour, sometimes as many as several hours.
Hey, hi. So just last Monday, I did a sex inventory with my sponsee, and she, we went over those 9 questions on page 69, and she answered them all yes or no. Like that was it. And so I told her we would come back to it the next week when we met, but I wasn't sure like what to do to get, because obviously it's not helping her with just yes and no answers, right?
Correct.
So how would you suggest I?
Yeah, I would want her to give a complete sentence, although the most important question is, as I mentioned, number 9. And so what did she write there? What should she have done instead?
Well, she had a little more on that one, which was good. You know, like, like she should have been, shouldn't cheated him on someone, or, she had some more details.
You're good.
So that was good. But I guess sometimes it's hard to get
Yeah,
to.
at this point, I would let it go. And what I would do is I'd give her a supplemental assignment to create her sex ideal, meaning the principles that will guide her current and future sex behavior, based on her looking back over her shoulder at what she thought was inappropriate. Now she's going to create guidelines as to what's going to be healthy and appropriate going forward. Have her write that in a sentence or two. You might be that clear with her. She sounds like she takes the easier, softer way. To be clear that it needs to be a sentence or two incorporating some principles of how the guidelines going forward. How does she aspire to operate in relationship with her sexual behavior?
Okay.
Yeah. I wouldn't go back actually at this point. Yeah.
Maybe the next time around it'll be deeper, but right.
If there's a next time around, it will be deeper because she'll be more conscious. Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
No, that's a wonderful question. Yeah, meet them where they are. That was a motto given to me by Dr. Alan Berger, a psychologist who's also 50 years sober in the program. Meet them where they are, not where they think they are, not where they want to be, not where you think they should be. Meet them where they really are. And so she's done the work, and there's no reason to go back other than to have her formalize her sex ideal. Yeah?
Okay, thank you.
One of the biggest things that this man stressed with me, and so I am going to stress it probably for the third time with you today, and that is no secrets. No secrets. He asked me during the fourth step, is there anything that you're reluctant to write down and or talk to me? And when I came to his door to do my fifth step with the appointment, 9 o'clock in the morning, he opened the door, and that was the only question. He didn't even greet me. He said, "Herb, is there anything that you've made up your mind not to tell me? Because if there is, go home." I said, "Good morning, Jerry. Let's have a cup of coffee." Because there wasn't anything. Of course, he had warned me, but it was such a big deal with him because he had had 15 years of sobriety and had relapsed because he had kept a secret in his first year. So he didn't know the truth of it, but he said maybe there's a correlation. He kept a secret. 15 years later, he relapsed, and he had a hard time coming back. He was 8 years sober by the time I went through the work with him, but that was a huge thing with him. And so I stress it because I do understand the worm in the wood, the cancer that will metastasize if it's not rooted out.
I wanted to kind of ask you, and my experience going back to the fear inventory is in the Big Book Awakenings, and I've done it in that style. I love the Big Book Awakenings, and it's the fear under the fear, boom, 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 all the way down. And in the Big Book Awakenings, they give you an example, and it gets down to fear of death, and then fear no God, right? And it's interesting how really it goes to right down to that root to bottom, that if I free fall and let everything go, who's going to catch me? So my old Big Book sponsor, I'm originally from New Jersey, the Jersey Shore. He always used to say to me, you've got to have a brand new step 2 experience every day. So, in these fears and these crazy it's like I go insane if I'm in fear. I'm trusting self can't reveal self to self, and self can't get out of self. So I'm just selfing myself all over the place, which is total insanity. So it's always when you say like this step 2 is how big is your God?
That's a wonderful question. Yes. Yeah, I tell people we need an upgrade more often than not.
Amen.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Amen.
yeah. And the Big Book Awakening was written by Dan Sherman,
Mhm.
died about 3 or 4 years ago. He went through the steps with Joe Hawk.
Right.
And Joe Hawk is the person who took me through the steps the third time, who gave me the experience with unmanageability. And
Oh,
I'm forever
wow.
grateful for that work. Dan's and my work is very parallel. His book is different than my book in some ways, and but we both have the same essential directions and teachings. So, yeah, all good stuff.
Yeah.
One of my other teachers, in fact, a Trappist monk that of the same order as Thomas Merton, Thomas Keating, he calls the fourth step the evacuation of the unconscious. The evacuation of the unconscious. And Freud had said, all human beings need to make the unconscious conscious, otherwise they are concluding that they're a victim of other people's malevolence or of mischievous fate. So you want to really grow up and go through the rite of passage to adulthood, we take responsibility for our lives. And the only way we can do that is if we're taking a deep and penetrating look at them.
I like being reminded God is or God isn't. But there's a line in the Big Book, and I can't bring it exactly back, but it's something like nothing in this world happens by mistake, or nothing in God's world happens by mistake. Do you know what line?
That is not in the Big Book. That might be in one of the stories, but it's not in the first 164 pages.
Oh, no, it's not, because I don't like that. I don't think it's helpful.
It's in Dr. Paul's story on, I believe it's page 419. And it's about acceptance. And I love his comments about acceptance. And if in fact you put the comment about nothing happens by mistake in context, I agree with it. I mean, it's all organic and it's all evolution, but I don't believe that God has a plan. I'm not sure where you're going with that, but that's a really long discussion.
Right. I just wondered if you believed that line, but now that you've reminded me the context it's in, that clarifies a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Acceptance, I really do believe, is the key to serenity. But what are you accepting? We're not accepting bad behavior. We're not accepting that we deserve to be punished. We're not accepting that. That's unacceptable. All right. We accept reality. That's huge. If I had any one cause at the center of my being, is to help people wake up to reality, because it just is. And most people take reality personally, and it's not personal. Reality is not personal. Gravity does not know my name, but it will punish me if I transgress it. But so will honesty and kindness and consideration and sensitivity and altruism. If I transgress those, I will be crushed. That's just reality. That's huge. That's going from contrary to reality to living in alignment with reality. And that's the whole point of the 12-step process, as I see it anyway. Yeah. All right. Well, the next workshop is going to be on steps 5, 6, and 7, speaking of removing these obstacles, removing these sources of tension. Step 5 is pretty straightforward. Lots of people have some misgivings about it, but 6 and 7 are really not understood. And as short as they are in the big book, they were probably as powerful as any other step, maybe more so in changing my life in 1988. So I look forward to sharing my experience with step 6 and 7. As short as they are the absolute most powerful steps to bring us into adulthood. And Bill uses that analogy in step 6 in the 12 and 12. He calls it bringing the boy to the man. Today we would talk about bringing the child to an adult. And he doesn't use the terms, but what he's really referring to is the rite of passage. The rite of passage to true maturity. The rite of passage that St. Francis talks about, becoming a channel. Listen to the promise here in the prayer as you pray it. Listen to the promise. Listen to the turning from self-centeredness to other-centeredness as a process. And listen to the promises of confirmation, of transformation, of conversion, of a spiritual awakening. That's why Bill, I believe, included this prayer in step 11 in the 12 and 12. It's worthy of meditation line by line. Please join me. Lord, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. Eckhart Tolle, and I've quoted this many times, Eckhart Tolle in The Power of Now says, the secret to life is to die before you die and realize there is no death. Step 4 is the beginning of the death of the false self. The balance of the steps are to bring us to resurrection. Thanks, everybody.